In the sprawling, restless city of Boston lived a young woman named Sofia Reynolds. To the elderly residents she bathed and fed, to the hurried nurses who brushed past her in corridors, she was nearly invisible, just another caretaker in wrinkled scrubs moving through the half-light of early morning shifts. She was 28 years old but carried the exhaustion of someone twice her age, her movements efficient and quiet, the kind of woman people looked through rather than at. Her name rarely stuck in anyone's memory. Every morning at 5, Sofia arrived at Shady Pines Elder Care before the sun rose. The air smelled of antiseptic and something beneath it, something like slow surrender. She moved through the halls with her cart, clearing meal trays that had barely been touched, wiping tables, arranging flowers in vases that no one would look at. She knew which residents liked their curtains open to watch the dawn. She knew that Mr. Patterson in room 214 took his coffee with exactly 2 sugars and no cream, that Mrs. Chen hummed the same Mandarin lullaby every afternoon at 2, that old Thomas in the corner had not spoken a word in 4 years but his eyes would brighten when Sofia held his hand and simply sat with him in the silence. Her feet moved on memory alone. The institution paid her $13 an hour for the overnight shift, which meant $4.50 for the evening shift at the diner near Haymarket. She had held this combination of jobs for 3 years. Every single dollar went toward her sister's medical bills. The surgery had cost $47,000. The medication was $300 a month. The physical therapy was another $150. Sofia had calculated it down to the penny. She would be paying for her sister's survival for the next 8 years, perhaps longer. The studio apartment she rented smelled of mold growing in the corners where the window never sealed properly. She had learned not to notice it. The refrigerator held 1 carton of milk, 3 eggs, half a loaf of bread, and a container of leftover rice from 2 nights ago. She did not own a television, a car, a coat that did not have a hole in the pocket. She owned clothes from the thrift store, shoes with worn soles, and a phone with a cracked screen that she held together with tape and prayer. On a Tuesday morning in June, after her shift at the care home ended, Sofia checked her bank account on that cracked screen. The number glowed back at her, $78. That was all she had left in the world. The rent was due in 10 days. $1,100. The gap between what she had and what she needed was so large it no longer felt real, like standing at the edge of an ocean and being asked to swim across it. Beneath her bed, in a cardboard box, she kept a single item that mattered. A child's first pair of shoes, size 2, white with tiny laces and a soft leather sole that had never touched pavement. She had worn them in the shelter when she was 3 years old, and someone had wrapped them in tissue paper and placed them in her hands the day she left. She had carried those shoes through 12 foster homes. She kept them still, not as nostalgia, but as proof. Proof that she had survived worse than this. Proof that a human body could endure almost anything if the mind decided it would. The summer heat descended on Boston like a punishment. By the middle of June, the city's asphalt radiated warmth into the evening, and the air hung thick and still, barely breathable. Sofia worked her shift at the diner, a place called Hector's near Haymarket, where the coffee was always bitter and the men who came in smelled like gin and entitlement. She poured their coffee, avoided their hands, smiled when she needed to, and pocketed the tips that never quite materialized. A $7 table, if they left anything at all. A $2 tip on a $45 check was considered generous. On an afternoon in late June, Sofia took her 15-minute break. 15 minutes was all she was permitted. She walked out into the heat, moving without direction, simply breathing air that was not thick with grease and old coffee. The sun pressed down on the pavement like a physical weight, and her feet carried her through Haymarket toward the waterfront. That was when she heard it. A sound that cut through the street noise, a child crying, not the sharp wail of a tantrum, but the broken, terrified sobbing of a young child lost. Sofia turned toward the sound. A small girl, no more than 6 years old, was pressed against the side of a parked car, her tiny body shaking. She wore an expensive dress, pale blue linen, and her hair was braided with white ribbons. Her feet dangled above the ground. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone. Sofia did not think. Her body moved toward the child like an animal responding to a call. She knelt on the hot pavement, her knees aching, and looked up at the girl's face. The child's eyes were swollen from crying, her cheeks streaked with tears. "Hey, sweetheart," Sofia said, her voice soft like a hand reaching out in darkness. "What is wrong? Are you hurt?" The girl looked down at this woman in a stained diner uniform and seemed to decide, in that way children do, that she could trust her. "I cannot find my nanny," the girl whispered. "She was here and then she was gone. I do not know where I am." Sofia stood slowly, still holding the girl's hand. The small fingers gripped hers with the force of drowning. "My name is Sofia." "What is your name?" "Emma." "Emma," Sofia repeated, as if saying the name would anchor them both to something solid. "Let us sit down right here on the curb, and we will wait. Your nanny is looking for you. Someone is looking for you. You are not alone." They sat on the hot concrete, Sofia's cheap uniform soaking through with sweat, Emma's white ribbons wilting in the heat. Sofia held the child's hand and spoke softly about nothing in particular, about the pigeons that nested in the buildings, about how water was cold and felt good when you were hot, about how brave Emma was being, how she would be okay. She did not let go. She did not leave. She simply sat beside this terrified child and bore witness to her fear. 43 minutes passed. A black Mercedes arrived on the street, moving without hurry, the kind of car that owned the pavement beneath its wheels. Two men stepped out, both tall, both wearing dark suits that cost more than everything Sofia owned combined. The first man's face was angular, severe, with eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw. The second man's hand moved to his phone, and his voice came out low and urgent. "We found her, sir. A woman stayed with her. She did not leave." The first man looked at Sofia. He looked at his daughter. His face changed in a way that Sofia could not quite name, something hard broke open, just for a moment, and then closed again. "Thank you," he said. His voice was deep, like an engine running beneath the street. Like something solid and final. Like an oath that could not be broken. "What is your name?" "Sofia," she said, and the word felt strange in her mouth, foreign, because no one ever asked her name. "Sofia," he repeated. He did not smile, but something in his eyes shifted. "You stayed with her." She was frightened, Sofia said. It was the simplest thing she could think to say. The truest thing. The man reached out and lifted Emma gently. The child clung to Sofia's hand for one more moment, then released it. The two men placed Emma in the back of the car with careful hands. The first man looked at Sofia one more time through the car window, and there was something in that look that felt like a door opening into a room she had never entered. The Mercedes pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the traffic. Sofia stood on the sidewalk, alone again, her hand still warm from where Emma's fingers had gripped it. She had no idea that the man in the suit was named Giovanni Castellano. She had no idea that he was the kind of man whose name moved through Boston's underworld like a temperature drop, like a blade wrapped in ice. She had no idea that in 3 days, everything she had built to survive would begin to collapse. She returned to the diner and poured coffee for another 5 hours. She took the bus home as the sun was setting. She ate the cold rice from the container, drank water from the tap, and fell asleep on her mattress thinking of the small girl's hand in hers, and wondering if anyone would hold that child's hand when she was afraid. 3 days later, on a Thursday night, as Sofia was walking to her car after the evening shift, the alley near the waterfront swallowed her whole. 3 months before the rescue, Sofia Reynolds stood in the fluorescent glare of Shady Pines elderly care home at 5:47 in the morning, her scrubs already stained with things she tried not to think about, pushing a cart of untouched breakfast trays down a hallway that smelled like ammonia and surrender. The lights hummed above her head, a sound like insects trapped in plastic, flickering in that way that made her eyes ache after 8 hours of staring at them. Room 214 was Mr. Kowalski's. She knocked softly, though she knew he would not answer, and pushed the door open to find him sitting in the vinyl chair by the window, his hands trembling in his lap like small animals caught in a cage. "Good morning, Margaret," he said when she entered, his voice paper-thin and distant. Margaret had been his wife. Margaret had been dead for 7 years. Sofia did not correct him. She never corrected him. "Good morning," she said instead, and she sat beside him on the edge of the bed, her knees cracking slightly from the pressure. She lifted the spoon and brought oatmeal to his mouth, and he ate it the way a child eats, without interest, without hunger, the spoon going in and out like a mechanical thing. His eyes were looking past her, past the window, past everything. Sofia had learned not to take this personally. She had learned that the people in this place were already halfway gone, and her job was simply to be a hand that fed them, a voice that said their names even when they could not remember their own. "You are kind to me," Mr. Kowalski said. Not Margaret. Not his daughter who never visited. Sofia. He was looking at her now, and his eyes were clear for a moment, and that moment cost her something she did not have to spare. "It is my honor," she said, and she meant it. She meant every word. The shift ended at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Sofia changed out of her scrubs in the bathroom stall because there was nowhere else to change, and she walked to the break room where Susan, another caregiver, was sitting with a sandwich from the deli across the street. The sandwich was wrapped in paper. It smelled like roast beef and mustard. Sofia's stomach made a sound like a small animal dying. "You want half?" Susan asked, already unwrapping it. "I already ate," Sofia said. The lie came easily. She had not eaten since yesterday. Yesterday had been a single banana and 3 cups of black coffee, and the banana had been sitting in her apartment for 4 days and was mostly brown spots, but it was still food. She was still here. She was still standing. Susan wrapped the sandwich back up, and Sofia could see the exact moment when her coworker decided not to push it. That was the thing about being invisible. People stopped trying to reach you after a while. The diner near Haymarket was called Frank's, and Frank was a man who had given up on life approximately 15 years ago and had been slowly liquefying ever since. He smelled like gin and the particular staleness of someone who has not seen sunlight in weeks. He paid Sofia $9 an hour under the table, which meant no taxes, which meant no record, which meant he could fire her whenever he wanted without any consequence at all. Sofia needed this job more than she needed dignity, so dignity was something she had learned to leave at the door. The dinner rush began at 5:30. 3 businessmen in suits that cost more than her monthly rent sat at the counter, and Sofia poured their coffee without making eye contact. The first man left a $2 tip on a $42 check. The second man put his hand on her hip as she turned away, his fingers splayed across the bone of her hip bone, claiming space that was not his to claim. Sofia stepped forward, out of his reach, without acknowledging that his hand had ever been there. Her throat did something tight and wrong. She continued pouring coffee. "What you learned when you were invisible was that people treated your body like a thing they could touch, like a counter or a chair, something that existed for their convenience. What you learned was that saying anything made it worse. What you learned was that silence was its own form of survival." At 8 o'clock that night, Douglas Hale walked into Frank's, and Sofia's stomach performed a sickening drop, like an elevator with cut cables. Hale was the kind of man who smiled like he owned everything, like the world was a thing he had already calculated the worth of and decided was cheap. His hair was slicked back from his forehead in a way that made his face look skeletal. Gold rings crowded his fingers, 3 on one hand, 2 on the other, and the knuckles underneath them were scarred in parallel lines, like something very small had clawed at him and he had clawed back harder. "Sofia Reynolds," he said, and the way he said her name made it sound like something obscene. "Still alive, I see." She did not sit down. She did not pour him coffee. She stood behind the counter with her hands pressed flat against the cold formica, and her voice came out steady, which was a miracle, which was a gift, which was a thing she could not quite explain. "I need more time," she said. "Time costs extra, sweetheart," Hale said, and he leaned across the counter so close she could smell the cologne on him, something expensive and suffocating. "You borrowed $12,000. You owe me $19,000 now. That was 6 months ago. Your sister's surgery is in 3 days. $85,000, Sofia. That is a lot of money for a woman who makes $9 an hour under the table. He knew. He knew about Clara. He knew the exact amount. He knew the exact date. I will get it, Sofia said. Will you? Hale smiled wider. With what money, exactly? He stood up then, and he did not pay for the water he had not ordered, and he walked out of the diner, leaving behind the smell of cologne and something else, the smell of a threat, the smell of something closing in. Sofia finished her shift at 11. She took the bus home, watching the city pass through the window in rectangles of neon and darkness. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been condemned 3 times and then somehow UN condemned through means Sofia did not want to understand. The walls had a permanent smell of mold, a living thing growing in the darkness, feeding on the moisture and the despair. She sat on her mattress on the floor, a bed frame was an expense she could not justify, and she spread the papers out in front of her like tarot cards predicting the future. The eviction notice. 30 days. The hospital bill from Clara's first surgery. $47,000. Sofia had sent every penny she had earned in 2 years to this place, to keep her sister alive, to keep her sister's brain from dying, to keep her sister from becoming like Mr. Kowalski, wandering in a place where past and present were the same thing. The loan statement from Douglas Hale. $19,000. The interest was calculated in red ink, compounding monthly, and each month the number grew like a cancer, eating what little she had managed to accumulate. At the bottom of her mattress, Sofia had hidden the one thing that mattered. She pulled out a cardboard box, brown with age, soft with being handled. Inside was a pair of shoes. Children's shoes. Size 2. Red canvas with white laces, the sole worn thin at the heel where a small foot had walked and walked and walked. These shoes came from the shelter. These shoes had carried her through the hallways when she was 4 years old and her mother had left her there on a Tuesday morning and never come back. These shoes had stayed with her through every foster home, every caseworker with tired eyes, every night she went to sleep wondering if she was the reason people left. She held the shoes in her lap, and she did not cry, because she had stopped crying somewhere around age 7, had decided that tears were a luxury she could not afford. Instead, she sat in the darkness of her apartment, holding the proof that she had survived before, and she knew that she would have to survive this too. Across the city, in a penthouse on Beacon Hill with ceilings that stretched 2 stories high, Giovanni Castellano was putting his daughter Emma to bed. Emma was 6 years old, golden-haired, the kind of child who had never known want, who had never stood in a cold hallway wondering if anyone would feed her. She was also the kind of child who could change everything with a single sentence, though neither of them knew it yet. "Papa," Emma said, her small hand in his, her eyes already heavy with sleep. "The nice lady who stayed with me when I was scared. Will we see her again?" Giovanni Castellano did not smile. Smiling was something he had learned not to do, something his face had forgotten how to do. But something shifted in his chest, some small door that had been locked so long he had forgotten it was there. "I do not know," he said, and he pulled the blanket up to her chin. But perhaps. He did not know her name. He did not know her address. He did not know that she was sitting alone in a dark apartment, holding a pair of small shoes, wondering how much longer she could keep breathing. But his daughter's question would not leave him. It sat in his mind like a stone dropped in water, and the ripples from that stone would soon reach the edges of everything he had built. 3 days passed. 3 days of Sofia working both jobs, eating nothing, sending money to the facility in New Hampshire, calculating and recalculating and finding no solution to the mathematics of her own survival. The experimental treatment for Clara's Alzheimer's would begin in exactly 36 hours, and Sofia had sent $23,000, which was every penny she had managed to save, borrowed, or earn through work that left her spine aching and her hands raw. She was still short. She was still short by $62,000. On the 3rd day, as the sun was setting and painting the sky the color of rust, Sofia was walking to her car in the parking lot of the diner, her feet dragging through the gravel, her mind somewhere far away, already calculating how she would tell her sister that the treatment would not happen, that the waiting list would not clear, that some other family's daughter would be chosen instead. The alley near the waterfront was not her usual route. But the bridge was backed up, and she was tired, and she took the shortcut that meant cutting through the old industrial district where the warehouses had been converted into lofts for people who could afford to live in authentic decay. The first thing she felt was not pain. The first thing she felt was surprise that it was happening at all, to her, to someone so utterly irrelevant that even violence should have overlooked her. Douglas Hale stepped out of the shadow of a loading dock, and he was not alone. The summer heat pressed down on Boston like a physical weight, and Sofia Reynolds did not notice. She was counting money again. $78 spread across her studio apartment's kitchen counter, arranged by denomination as if a different order might somehow make them multiply. 120. 3 tens. 8 ones. She had 60 hours to find $85,000. Her sister Clara would start the experimental Alzheimer's treatment in 3 days, or she would not start it at all. There was no waiting list. There was no second chance. Sofia's hands shook as she swept the bills back into an envelope. She was 30 years old but looked older, the kind of older that comes from sleeping 4 hours a night and eating what patients left on their trays at the nursing home. Her eyes were grey and hollow. Her hair, once dark, had begun showing threads of silver at the temples. She pulled on her waitress uniform for the diner shift, the fabric worn soft from washing, and stepped out into the August afternoon. The sidewalk burned through her shoes. Storm clouds gathered in the distance, dark and swollen, but the sun still beat down mercilessly. She was supposed to be at work in 20 minutes. Instead, she heard it. A child's voice, fractured with terror. Sofia stopped walking. 3 blocks ahead, near the corner of Hanover and Prince, a small girl in a pale blue dress stood pressed against a parked car. She was no more than 6 years old, her dark hair tangled, her face streaked with tears. Sofia did not think. She simply moved toward the sound like a ship toward a lighthouse. The child's breathing came in gasps. "Hey, sweetheart," Sofia said, lowering herself to one knee on the hot sidewalk. The heat seared through the fabric immediately. "My name is Sofia. What is yours?" The girl's eyes were the color of chestnuts, wide with the particular panic of a child who has lost everything. "I cannot find my nanny. I cannot find her, and I do not know where Daddy is, and I am scared." "I know you are scared," Sofia said. Her voice was steady, though her own heart hammered against her ribs. "But you are safe right now. You are safe because I am here. What is your name, beautiful girl?" "Emma." The child's lower lip trembled. "Emma Castellano." Sofia did not recognize the name, did not know that it meant something in this city, that it opened doors and closed doors and determined whether certain people lived or died. She simply saw a terrified child. She took Emma's small hand, and the girl gripped both of Sofia's hands with the strength of pure panic. "Emma, I want you to tell me something happy," Sofia said, sitting down on the curb beside her. The concrete was hot enough to burn. "Tell me what your favorite color is." "Blue," Emma whispered. "Like my dress. Like the sky before the storm comes." "Blue is a beautiful color," Sofia said. "And storms are scary, but they always pass." "Emma, do you know that? Storms always pass and then the sun comes back out." They sat there for 8 minutes. Sofia later realized she had counted every single second, her phone growing heavier in her pocket with each missed text from the diner manager. But Emma's breathing slowed. Sofia told her about the rain that cleaned the city, about how after rain everything smelled new and green. She told her about a little girl she had known once, in a shelter, who was just as scared and just as brave. "I thought no one would find me," Emma whispered. "Someone always finds you," Sofia said. Her voice cracked slightly. "You are not alone, sweetheart. You are never as alone as you feel." The black Mercedes arrived with the stillness of something inevitable. It pulled to the curb and 2 men stepped out. The first man was broad-shouldered, with a scar running through his right eyebrow like a question mark written in violence. His name was Carlo, and he had worked for Giovanni Castellano for 15 years. The second man was leaner, with eyes the color of winter water. This was Nino. He assessed Sofia in the way that soldiers assess civilians, quickly, comprehensively, dismissing her as non-threatening. "Emma," Carlo said, and his voice transformed completely. Where there had been hardness, there was now tenderness. "Mama has been so worried. Come here, Piccola." Emma released Sofia's hands and ran to Carlo. He lifted her easily and held her against his chest. But over the child's shoulder, Carlo watched Sofia rise to her feet, dust clinging to her knees where the concrete had burned them raw. "What is your name, miss?" Nino asked. Sofia shook her head. "I am just glad she is okay. She was scared." "You stayed with her?" Carlo said. It was not a question. "Yes." "For how long?" "I do not know. Maybe 10 minutes. She needed someone to stay." Carlo and Nino exchanged a look that meant nothing to Sofia but meant everything in the language they spoke. Carlo held his phone to his ear. "Boss, we have her. She is safe. A woman stayed with her the whole time. She held her hand and kept her calm." A pause. Carlo's eyes remained fixed on Sofia. "No, sir. No, she did not ask for anything. Did not even give her name." The Mercedes pulled away from the curb. Emma reached back through the open window, her small hand waving. "Will I see you again?" she called. Sofia smiled through her exhaustion, through the ache in her feet and the hollow space in her stomach where dinner should have been. "Maybe someday, sweetheart. Take care of yourself." The car vanished into traffic. Nino turned to Carlo. "Who was that?" "Nobody," Nino said. "Just some woman." But Carlo did not agree. He had seen something in the way Sofia held that child, in the steadiness of her voice despite obvious poverty, in the way she gave comfort without expecting anything in return. In 15 years of working for Giovanni Castellano, Carlo had learned that most people wanted something. Everyone had an angle. But this woman had asked for nothing. 3 miles away, in an office above Castellano's restaurant, Giovanni Castellano sat behind a desk of dark mahogany in a room lined with leather and books he had never read. He was 42 years old, with grey threading through his dark hair and eyes that had seen the worst of what men could do to each other. He was built broad and powerful, the kind of man who filled a room simply by existing. Carlo's call came through his private line. Giovanni listened without interrupting. When Carlo finished, there was silence for 7 seconds. "Find out who she is," Giovanni said. His voice was low, solid like an oath. "Everything. Where she lives. Where she works. Who her family is." "Yes, sir." Giovanni ended the call. He leaned back in his chair, and his mind moved to a place he did not often allow it to go, to a tenement in Saudi 30 years earlier, to a small boy lying in a narrow bed, listening to his father's footsteps on the stairs, bracing for the fists that always came. He thought of his mother, who had held him through the pain and taught him that some men could be stopped, but you had to be willing to become something colder than they were. He thought of Emma, his daughter, his only child, the thing he had built his entire empire to protect. Across Boston, in a penthouse office overlooking the harbor, Diana Whitfield reviewed photographs on her desk. She was 53 years old but looked 40, the kind of beautiful that comes from money and cruelty combined. Her hair was silver and swept back from her face with surgical precision. She wore a white suit that cost more than most people earned in a month. The waitress at the diner, her assistant said, placing a photograph on the desk. "The one you asked about. Her name is Sofia Reynolds. Works 2 jobs. Lives alone. No family support." Diana studied the photograph, a girl with tired eyes and worn clothes, someone the world had already decided did not matter. She smiled. "Keep watching her," Diana said. "When people are that desperate, they make mistakes. And desperate people are useful." The storm returned that afternoon. The clouds that had been gathering since morning finally opened, and rain fell in sheets that turned the streets into rivers. Lightning cracked the sky open. Thunder rolled through the buildings like the sound of God slamming a door. Sofia was walking from her diner shift 3 days later, her feet moving through pure muscle memory, her mind somewhere far away in New Hampshire where her sister lay in a hospital bed, waiting for a treatment that seemed to exist only in mathematics she could not solve. The bridge was backed up. She took the shortcut through the old industrial district, where warehouses had been converted into lofts for people who could afford authentic decay. The rain had stopped, but the street still glistened, and the air smelled like wet concrete and something rotten. The first thing she felt was not pain. The first thing she felt was surprise. Douglas Hale stepped from the shadow of a loading dock. He was 45 years old, with a kind of bulk that came from money and entitlement, with gold rings on his fingers and a suit that had been tailored in another country. Behind him came a woman. She moved like silk wrapped around a knife. This was Diana Whitfield. She wore a white suit that somehow remained immaculate despite the rain. "Sofia Reynolds," Diana said. Her voice was smooth, almost kind. "You owe Mr. Hale a great deal of money." Sofia's stomach dropped. "I am paying it back. I send what I can." "You send nothing," Hale said. $19,000, Sofia. You borrowed it 14 months ago. You have not made a single payment." "I sent money," Sofia said, but even as she spoke, she knew it was not true. She had sent nothing because she had nothing. Every dollar had gone to the experimental treatment fund. Every penny. The $78 in her pocket was her entire world. Diana circled her slowly, like a predator who had already decided on the kill. "I have a solution for you, Sofia. A solution that makes your problems disappear." "What kind of solution?" "I run a service," Diana said. "We help women like you. Women with debts. Women with no options. You work for me for 2 years, your debt to Mr. Hale disappears completely. And your sister, Clara, yes, she gets her treatment." Sofia's blood turned to ice. This woman knew about Clara. This woman had been watching her. "What kind of work?" Sofia asked, though she already knew. Her instincts screamed danger in a frequency only her body could hear. Diana smiled, and in that smile was every cruelty Sofia had ever encountered. "Hospitality. Entertainment. You are pretty enough, once we clean you up." "No," Sofia said. She took a step back. "No. I will find another way." Hale's hand shot out and closed around her arm. His gold rings cut into her skin like teeth. "You do not have another way, sweetheart." Sofia jerked free with a strength born of pure survival instinct and ran. The alley near the waterfront was the fastest route, a shortcut she should not have known but did. Her feet pounded the pavement. Behind her, she could hear them running. The rain had started again, light but cold. Hale caught her before she made it to the street. His fist connected with her eye socket, and her vision exploded into stars. She fell hard against the brick wall, her hand scraping on pavement, skin-ripping. Diana kneeled beside her, gripping her hair with surprising strength. "No one will miss you," Diana whispered. Her voice was gentle, almost affectionate. "Your sister will die alone without the money you will never earn now. You understand that, yes? You are nobody, Sofia. Accept it. Let it be easy." Hale hit her again. His hand closed around her throat, and suddenly she could not breathe. Fingerprint bruises bloomed beneath her skin like flowers. Her blouse tore. Blood soaked through. She tried to fight, but there was no strength left. There had never been strength enough for this. They left her crumpled in the alley as the rain fell harder. Lightning illuminated her broken body. Thunder covered the sound of her weeping. Sofia lay on wet pavement for a long time. She could not move. Could not breathe without pain. The rain kept falling. She thought of the tiny shoes under her bed, size 2, from the shelter where she had survived a childhood that had taught her that survival had no rules and no mercy. She had thought the worst was behind her. She had thought she had escaped. But maybe survival had a limit. Maybe this was it. Then she remembered something. Emma's small hand in hers. Emma's voice, trembling but trusting. "Will I see you again?" Sofia forced herself to stand. Every movement was agony. Her vision blurred to almost nothing, her left eye was swollen completely shut. But she moved through the rain on instinct alone, her body following a path her mind did not consciously choose. She did not know where she was going until she saw it, a sign in gold letters that read Castellanos. She pushed through the glass doors. The warmth hit her first, a shock after the cold rain. Then the smell, garlic and wine and roasted meat and something rich that meant safety. The restaurant was quiet, elegant, candlelit. Patrons in expensive clothes looked up as she stumbled inside, and there was a collective intake of breath. A maitre d' stepped forward with alarm, his mouth opening to ask her to leave. Then Carlo appeared from the back. His face went pale. He had been with Giovanni for 15 years, and in 15 years he had learned to read every shift in the world's violence. He saw a woman, barely conscious, covered in blood. He saw handprint bruises on her throat. He saw one eye completely swollen shut. He saw someone who had been beaten by a predator. "Mother of God," Carlo whispered. Sofia's knees gave out. Carlo caught her before she fell, his strong arms holding her upright. "Boss, get out here now," he said into his radio. His voice was no longer the voice of a man. It was the voice of a soldier recognizing war. Giovanni emerged from the private booth in the back. He froze mid-step. His entire body went rigid as if someone had run a blade through him. The woman who had saved his daughter was bleeding through her blouse. One eye was swollen completely shut. Handprints covered her throat like a second skin. For 3 seconds, Giovanni could not move. Then he was moving. "Clear the restaurant," he said. His voice was deadly calm. "Now." He knelt beside Sofia, his hands gentle despite their strength. His hands, which had committed terrible things, now trembled as he reached for her. "Who did this to you?" His voice broke the careful control he had maintained for decades. Sofia tried to focus through her good eye. "I am sorry. I did not know where else to go." Giovanni lifted her as if she weighed nothing. "You came to the right place." He carried her toward the back room, shouting for his personal doctor to meet him there. Carlo followed, his face dark with understanding. As Giovanni laid Sofia on the leather couch in his office, something shifted in the air of that room. Something cold and dangerous stirred in his chest, something he thought he had locked away years ago. She whispered something so quietly he almost missed it. "Why would you help me? I am nobody." Giovanni met her gaze, and in that moment, he was not a mafia boss. He was a man who remembered being helpless. He was a man who had built an empire on the principle that no one under his protection would ever feel this way. "You are not nobody," he said. His voice was solid like an oath, like a prayer, like a promise that would cost whatever it needed to cost. "You stayed with my daughter when you had nothing to gain. That makes you someone." By dawn, Carlo had learned everything. By noon, Giovanni had made his decision. By nightfall, the hunt had begun. The doctor's hands moved with practiced precision, his silver hair catching the light of Giovanni's office as he examined Sofia's ribs with the gentleness of a man who had stopped asking questions decades ago. He was 63, his face lined with the weight of secrets he would carry to his grave. "Broken rib," he said quietly. "Severe contusions across the abdomen and chest. Possible concussion. She needs rest. Monitoring. No movement for at least 2 weeks." Giovanni nodded once, a gesture that Carlo understood meant the doctor would be paid triple his normal rate and would remain available at any hour. When the door closed behind him, Sofia tried to sit up, her breath catching like shattered glass. The pain was a living thing, wrapping around her chest, stealing the air from her lungs. "I cannot stay here," she whispered. "They will come looking for me. I know how these things work. I have seen enough." Giovanni pulled a leather chair close to the couch where she lay, his movements deliberate, controlled. His tailored suit was still immaculate, his gold watch catching the lamplight. "Tell me everything," he said. His voice was different now, not the voice of a man who commanded empires, but something deeper, something that made Carlo and Nino exchange a glance neither had seen pass between them in 15 years. Sofia's good eye fixed on his face. She began to speak, and with each word, the pieces of her desperation assembled themselves into something Giovanni understood with terrible clarity. "Douglas Hale," she said. "I borrowed from him 8 months ago. Just $5,000. My sister, Clara, she needed treatment. Experimental immunotherapy. The standard options had failed. The doctors gave her 6 months without it. Hale's interest rate was 40%. He said it was reasonable. I was desperate, so I agreed." She paused, her fingers gripping the edge of the couch. "The treatment costs $85,000. All of it. In 3 days, or Clara loses her place in the trial. $85,000. I have $78 to my name." Giovanni's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Diana Whitfield approached me at the diner 3 weeks ago," Sofia continued. "She owns a hospitality service. She said she could get me work. Private events. High-paying clients. She said I could make $5,000 in a single weekend." Sofia's voice dropped lower. "I later understood what that meant. The women who went with her on those jobs, some of them did not come back. Or they came back different. Broken in ways that do not show on the outside." "And you refused," Giovanni said. "It was not a question. I refused. So she went to Hale. They decided I would work off my debt another way. As collateral. She wanted to put me into her network. When I refused again, Hale came to find me at the diner. In an alley near the waterfront." Sofia's hand moved to her throat, where the handprints had begun to darken into bruises the color of storm clouds. "He said Clara would not get her treatment. He said I was property now. He said no one would miss me if I disappeared." The silence in the room became something tangible, something that pressed down on the air itself. Carlo stood motionless by the door. Nino's hand had moved instinctively to his side, though he wore no weapon here, in this office where Giovanni kept his most private conversations. Giovanni reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew his phone. He did not look away from Sofia. "Carlo. I need everything on Douglas Hale and Diana Whitfield. Everything. Bank accounts, associates, properties, every victim you can find. By dawn." He paused. "And call the Morettis. Tell them I have a gift for them. Tell them it involves a trafficking network that has been operating in their territory without their knowledge." He ended the call and set the phone down on the mahogany desk. Sofia shook her head, her eye glistening. "You do not understand what you are doing. I have nothing to offer you in return. Nothing. I cannot pay you back. I cannot." Her voice cracked like thin ice. "I am nobody. I am just a woman who was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Giovanni leaned forward. His scar, the one that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, caught the light as he moved. "You stayed with my daughter when she was terrified and alone. You asked for nothing. You did not demand payment or explanations. You simply held her hand." He paused. "That is not nobody. That is someone. That is exactly someone." He made another call. This time his voice was softer, but no less absolute. "Wire $85,000 to Massachusetts General Hospital. The account for Clara Reynolds. Tonight. Before midnight." He gave the account number and hung up without waiting for confirmation. Sofia's tears came silently, her shoulders shaking with the effort of not sobbing, because her broken rib would not allow it. "Your sister will receive her treatment," Giovanni said. "You will stay here where you are safe. You will not return to that diner. You will not go to your apartment. You will not contact anyone." He stood, and his shadow fell across her like protection. "Someone should have done this for my mother 30 years ago. Someone should have stepped in when my father was destroying everything she was. I built an empire on the principle that no one under my protection would ever feel the way you felt in that alley. You are under my protection now, whether you knew it or not." 3 blocks away, in an office that overlooked Boston's financial district, Douglas Hale sat at his desk counting money. Cash. Always cash. The phone on his desk buzzed. Unknown number. He answered. The voice on the other end was flat, empty of inflection, the kind of voice that belonged to men who had committed things they could not undo. "You put your hands on the wrong woman, Douglas." Hale went still. The cash scattered across his desk. "Who is this?" The line went dead. He tried to call Diana Whitfield. She did not answer. She would not answer. At that exact moment, she was standing in her penthouse, 42 stories above the city, watching 12 black SUVs pull up to her building's entrance. Tactical gear. Federal agents. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone, but before she could dial, her door exploded inward. The night fractured into 1,000 pieces of sound and chaos, and the end of everything she had built. By dawn, Douglas Hale's office erupted. The door did not open, it exploded inward. Men in black moved like shadows, their faces covered, their movement synchronized with the precision of a choreographed violence. Hale tried to run toward his private exit, but they were faster. Always faster. Carlo stepped into the light, his scarred face expressionless, his voice like gravel wrapped in ice. "Douglas Hale. You put your hands on someone who mattered to our boss." Hale collapsed to his knees. His body trembled like a cornered animal, all the money, all the power, all the cruelty evaporating in an instant. "I did not know. I swear I did not know who she was." "That makes it worse," Nino said, pulling him to his feet. "You prey on women you believe are powerless. That is worse." They dragged him toward the parking garage, past his mahogany desk, past the cash that had scattered like confetti. Carlo made a call. "Package ready for delivery." Within 30 minutes, Hale sat in a warehouse in Saudi across from 3 Moretti lieutenants. They did not kill him. Death would have been too quick, too easy, too merciful. Instead, they photographed every document. Every loan contract. Every victim's name. Every transaction. By sunrise, federal agents had raided his home, his office, his safe deposit boxes. Loan sharking. Racketeering. Extortion. 40 years in federal prison. His assets seized. Everything unmade. By noon, he was dragged through the courthouse in handcuffs, screaming that he would cooperate, that he would give names, that he deserved mercy. No one was listening. Diana Whitfield's arrest happened at dawn. The FBI broke down her door, and she stood in her silk robe, trying to maintain composure that shattered like glass when the agent read her rights. Human trafficking conspiracy. Racketeering. They had everything, the photographs, the bank statements, the testimonies of 12 women who had escaped her network with Giovanni's help. Documents found anonymously and delivered to federal prosecutors. She was walked out of her building in handcuffs, cameras flashing, her face on every news channel by noon. Wealthy socialite arrested in major trafficking ring. 6 weeks later, the judge read the verdict. Life in federal prison. She sat in the courtroom as her perfect composure finally cracked, her hands shaking because she had lost money and reputation and freedom all at once. In Giovanni's penthouse office, Sofia read the news on a tablet, her broken rib still aching, her eye still swollen purple and yellow. The headline scrolled past. Major trafficking network dismantled. Dozens arrested. Federal investigation ongoing. She understood what he had done. What he had unmade. For her. Because she was no longer nobody. 1 year later, summer returned to Boston like a fever breaking. The heat pressed against the city in waves, melting the asphalt, making the air shimmer above the streets where Sofia Reynolds once walked invisible, counting her steps to save on shoe leather. But tonight, she stood at floor-to-ceiling windows 42 stories above the harbor, and the woman reflected in the glass was someone the old Sofia would not have recognized. The simple black dress fit her properly. Her hair, pulled back from her face, showed the bone structure that exhaustion had hidden before. $2,000 sat in her bank account, not wealth, but it was a number that did not terrify her. Clara lived in a facility now, real care, real hope, her remission holding steady through the spring. Sofia worked as an administrator at Boston Children's Hospital, a position Giovanni had arranged but that she had earned through competence and the kind of compassion that could not be faked. She had an apartment without mold. She had a future that was hers. But she was not happy. The charitable gala hummed with conversation and clinking glasses behind her. 300 people in designer clothes, all of them deliberately not looking at the penthouse balcony where Sofia stood alone, staring out at the harbor as though the answer to something might be written in the dark water. Carlo had called Giovanni an hour ago. "She is here, boss." Standing by the window. Alone. Like she is waiting for something. The rain started without warning. First drops, then sheets, drumming against the glass like fingertips demanding entry. Thunder rolled across the sky, and lightning split the darkness into pieces. Giovanni Castelliano emerged onto the balcony, his cashmere coat worth more than Sofia's annual salary absorbing the rain without protest. He did not touch her. He simply stood beside her in the darkness, the storm breaking over the city like an answer to a prayer he had stopped praying a year ago. Sofia. She did not turn immediately. When she did, her eyes were steady, clear, strong. "I wondered if you would come tonight." "I wanted to give you time," Giovanni said quietly. "To let you live without owing anyone anything." "I do not owe you," Sofia said. Her voice did not shake. "But I have wanted to thank you for a year, and you would not let me." Giovanni shook his head slowly. "You do not need to thank me for doing what was right." The storm intensified. Rain hammered the windows, and through the water, the city lights blurred into impressionist paintings, all color without definition. Sofia stepped closer, close enough that he could see the small scar on her collarbone, the one that had healed over a year but would never fully fade. "You saved my life," she said. "You saved Clara. You destroyed 2 people who preyed on the helpless." "Why, Giovanni? Why would a man like you do that?" Silence. Long enough to hear the rain, to hear the thunder rolling away toward the ocean, to hear the terrible honesty that comes when 2 people finally speak the truth they have been carrying in separate rooms for 365 days. "Because when I saw you with Emma that day," Giovanni finally said, and his voice was rough, like gravel and smoke, holding her hand, asking nothing in return, "I saw something I thought was beyond saving. Kindness without agenda. Strength without cruelty. You did not need my protection, Sofia. Your strength was always there. It just needed to be witnessed by someone who understood the cost of surviving." Sofia's breath caught. "You saw me." "I have always seen you," Giovanni said. "From the moment Carlo told me you stayed with my daughter. You were never invisible. The world was just blind." She took his hand. The first time in a year. His palm was warm, his grip careful, as though she might break if he held too tight. But she did not break. She had already survived breaking. "I thought I was nobody," Sofia whispered. "You were never nobody," Giovanni said. "Not to Emma. Not to me." They stood in the darkness while the storm raged outside, 2 people carved from brutal childhoods, 2 people who should have been destroyed by what they endured but were not. Sofia thought of the cardboard box under her old bed, the tiny shoe size 2 that she had kept from the shelter where she was raised. She thought of the woman she was 12 months ago, desperate, invisible, $78 away from absolute nothing. She thought of Emma's small hand in hers, the choice she made to stay with a stranger's child when she had nothing to gain. She understood now what Giovanni had given her. Not salvation. Witnessing. "A year ago you stumbled into my restaurant bleeding and broken," Giovanni said, his eyes locked on hers. "You asked why I would help you. You said you were nobody. Do you still believe that?" Sofia shook her head. Tears moved down her face, but they were not tears of pain. They were tears of recognition, of finally seeing herself the way he had seen her all along. "No," she said. "I am somebody. I always was. I just needed someone to see it." "The world will try to make you invisible again," Giovanni continued. His hand tightened on hers. "It will try to tell you that survival is the best you can hope for. But you are proof that is a lie. You saved my daughter. You saved something in me. You saved yourself." The storm began to pass. The rain softened, the thunder moved toward the harbor, and between the breaking clouds, stars appeared. One by one. Like promises being kept. Sofia's sister Clara was alive. The women Diana Whitfield trafficked were freed, every one of them. Douglas Hale and Diana Whitfield were in federal prison where they would remain for the rest of their lives, forgotten by everyone except the people they had hurt. And Sofia Reynolds, the nobody caretaker who worked double shifts and ate leftovers and had $78 to her name, had built a life where she was seen, valued, and loved. Not because a powerful man saved her, but because she had the strength to survive until someone witnessed her worth. In the darkest moments, when you feel invisible, when you have nothing left but $78 and a pair of tiny shoes from a childhood you survived, remember this: your strength does not need to be saved. It needs to be seen. And when someone truly sees you the way Sofia was seen, the world cannot make you invisible again. As the first stars broke through the clouds, Giovanni pulled Sofia close, and his final words were delivered not as a promise, but as a truth that could not be unmade. The storm will pass and you are far stronger than you think. If this story moved you, drop a like right now. Share it with someone who needs to remember they are not invisible. Subscribe because tomorrow we have another story about the moment everything changes. And comment below, have you ever felt invisible? What made you realize you were always somebody? Your story matters. We will see you in the next one.